I'm Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning into another season of NASCAR coverage on the Prime Sports Radio Network. On this Thursday edition, for the 1st of March 2018, we're going to recap Kevin Harvick's dominating win in Atlanta and take a look ahead at Las Vegas, as well as discuss some key driver analysis from Martin Truex Jr. to Jimmy Johnson and more with race analysts CJ Verdun and Eric Smith. This Prime Sports NASCAR brought to you by RaceReviewOnline.com and KennyBruce.net on the Prime Sports Radio Network starts now. Transmissions will resume. Now try to push, try to keep us all down and hope that we will never see the truth. All right, thanks for tuning in to Prime Sports NASCAR as we have two races in the books for the Cup season that is already underway, and before you know it, we'll have a whole bunch of races to look back at, but we have a Las Vegas race to talk about. We're going to get you ready for that. We'll take a look at the odds for the race and get some early observations from our race analysts, as well as taking a look, of course, at some of the other top headlines going on in the sport after the first couple of weeks. Before we get started, we want to remind you to click on the You Wager banner on the Prime Sports Network website. Get started with wagering on the Pennzoil 400 from Vegas on Sunday with a special $100 risk-free wager if you sign up right now with a $100 minimum deposit. And you're always going to receive fast and reliable payouts with one of the top sports books in the industry at uwager.eu. To welcome in my co-hosts to the show, first of all, CJ Verdun is a RotoWire.com writer for NASCAR and F1. He's a two-time Racing Writer of the Year award winner by the Fantasy Sports Writers Association. So, CJ, Kevin Harvick was your top pick. He came through, and very surprising that the top dominating driver all week for the past few years actually dominated and won the race.
Yeah, quite the performance from Kevin Harvick. I think we had a suspicion that Ford was going to be strong, and Kevin Harvick in particular, just after the showing that we saw in Daytona. It was really interesting just to see how dominant they actually were, though. And Kevin Harvick, 181 laps led over 325 laps, finally getting back in victory lane at this track where he scored his first series win. So it was pretty emotional for him. It had taken him a while, but I think we had a good indication that he was going to be good even by his performance last year, which ended up, kind of blowing up in his face.
Yeah, and by the way, I should have also added in on that other dominating drivers other than what we saw last year from, say, Martin Truex Jr.
There you go.
Yeah, so he was the one that would dominate and win races. Okay, let's get in Eric Smith. He is the lead motorsports editor for RaceReviewOnline.com. And Eric, what do you think so far about what would you say after just a couple of weeks if you had to just pick like one storyline that would be the most interesting so far?
Going into Atlanta, I would have said the whole Bubba Wallace thing, just of all the attention he was getting, especially from Daytona. Right now, I would say also, the Bubba and Denny Hamlin feud kind of going on, but I would say Ford and their dominance right now. While it's on track is what it was last year, and then it kind of tapered off. They've come out swinging so far, and I think a lot of people thought they'd be down, myself included. So I would say as far as across the board, that would be one of my main storylines is just how good Ford has been compared to the other two manufacturers so far.
Are you surprised about Ford so far, CJ, right now? And as Eric noted, and if you take a look, of course, at both of your reports over at RotoWire.com and Race Review Online, you guys talk about a lot of these interesting storylines and stats to get you ready every week. And one of the ones that's very important regarding Ford, just keeping in mind their dominance, is that all four, and they were different drivers, won the stages last week. Kurt Busch, Ryan Blaney, Kevin Harvick, Brett Keselowski. 11 of the top 13 drivers in stage points are Fords after the first couple of races, and 4 of the top 5 in the overall point standings are Fords, CJ.
Yeah, no, not surprised at all. I mean, Eric said it. When you watched Ford at the beginning of last season, specifically with Penske Racing and Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano, they were super fast. Obviously Toyota had the edge last year, but Ford wasn't far behind. Penske had that issue kind of early on into the season after a bit of their success. Logano had that encumbered win. After that, they faded. I had a feeling that they were storing it all up for 2018, and they've really come out of the gate strong, stronger even than I expected. I mean, I have a lot of Fords in my championship picks just based on my anticipation of what they were going to be able to accomplish this year, but so far they're even exceeding those expectations.
And it's not a surprise at this point so far. Maybe it's a surprise that Jimmy Johnson is. I mean, things are just going pretty awful there. Maybe as bad as it is, might be a surprise, Erik. But fact is, I don't think it is a surprise that the Hendrick team itself is struggling when you've got a lot of young drivers there. You do have to wonder how much longer Jimmy Johnson is going to be able to keep up at peak pace. Sooner or later, every dynasty comes to an end. And I just wonder if this is the beginning of a very long season for Hendricks. I don't know. You tell me whether you think they're going to be able to turn things around.
Honestly, that's another storyline I think is pretty big, that we're only 2 races in, that it's hard to hit a panic button yet. But if I were Johnson and Hendrick, I almost would. And it goes to the fact that I talked about at the beginning of the season is Johnson's never been the guy that's kind of been the head attention getter at Hendrick. You've always had Jeff Gordon. Dale Earnhardt Jr., of course, came on in 2008. And all that time, Johnson was just kind of under the radar, winning championships. Well, they're both gone. And now they've got 3 drivers that are 24 years of age and younger, with very little Cup kind of experience, I guess to say, other than Chase Elliott, that there's really everybody's leaning on Jimmy Johnson. And if you look at last year and how he really struggled to grasp that new car and the handling, and he usually likes his cars loose anyways, and he still couldn't handle it. And now you look at this year, yeah, I would say if he struggles again this weekend, it may be time to ring the old panic bell over there at Hendrick, because I never was expecting a whole lot out of William Byron or Alex Bowman this year anyways.
Sure.
I thought maybe they could contend to make the playoffs and they might win a race, but that was about it. I didn't expect them to make a whole lot of noise. I thought Chase Elliott would do a lot better. He really was a non-factor all of the whole weekend last weekend at Atlanta. He just kind of, I would say, almost fluked his way into a top 10 finish. He qualified outside the first round, never was a factor all day. His 10-lap averages were always 20th on back in the final practice. So he never really had the speed. And then you look at Johnson, their leader of the clubhouse, and he's made 4 starts this year if you count the duels and the clash.
Yep.
And he's crashed in all 4 of them.
Yeah.
Granted, Atlanta, that spin looked exactly like the spins you'd see last year. He just lost it off of turn 2 all by himself. That just shows you how on edge his car is, and he's not grasping it still. That worries me a little bit. And I looked, if you go back to Talladega last year in the playoffs, he's finished 24th or worse in 6 of his last 8 starts. So I just don't see it out of him this year. At this point, if he doesn't do well at Vegas, he's led 14 of his 16 starts there. He's won 4 races in a 6-year span from 2005 to 2010. And since 2010, he's only had 2 finishes worse than 11th. If he comes out and looks like he did at Atlanta, I would say this is probably what you're going to get out of Jimmy Johnson this year.
Yeah, and a big difference, CJ, between Jimmy Johnson struggling, not just in the standings, but just just overall, and the fact that Martin Truex Jr. is off to a little bit of a slower start. Because you can look back to last year. It wasn't like Truex got off to a blazing start anyway. And it's kind of hard to really, honestly, this is just one race. I mean, Daytona is just a luck race. So it's only been one race. But is there anything at all that when you take a look at the difference between Jimmy Johnson struggling or some of the other drivers out there that might be struggling as well, or some of the drivers that you think that maybe you expected a little bit more out of, even though it's only a couple of races? Big difference there?
Well, I think I'm okay with Truex. So he didn't win last year until we got to Las Vegas, and he dominated that race. I think he got a top 5 last week at Atlanta. You know, he had some trouble throughout the middle of the race. I think he kind of lost his handling, moved back through the field, had trouble working his way back up, but he was back into the top 5 by the time it finished. So I don't have concerns there. Like Erik, I do have concerns at Hendrick Motorsports. I mean, remember, Chevrolet's got a new body style here. Everybody, it's new car to everybody, all the Chevrolet teams. We know Jimmy Johnson likes to drive his car loose, but I think the aerodynamics of this car, while they could potentially be an advantage for them in the future, and maybe we've seen some of that or flashes of it a few times that we've seen it so far this season, but I think that it's going to take some time for them to be able to dial that in. I wouldn't write him off for the season, certainly, but it is getting a little bit, on edge for Hendrick Motorsports. I think Kyle Larson is the best of the Chevrolet, not a Hendrick driver. I think probably next in line would be Chase Elliott. Jimmy Johnson's just got to figure out how to work this car, and then all of the Chevrolet teams need to figure out how to get the most out of that new body.
Well, Joey Logano is leading right now in the point standings. Somebody on this show picked him to win the championship, but I don't remember who that is. But it is only 2 races, so I'll toot my horn now only because it's only 2 races, and he may not be in first place for the rest of the year. But it is a good start for Logano. And you look at Blaney in second place, Keselowski runner-up last week, Erik. And that team, we were wondering, would the third car be an issue for Penske? And that has not been the case so far. They have gotten off to a really nice start. And when you segue into the race this week, even though Logano hasn't won there before, he's got 4 straight top 10s there, 3 top 5s, and a runner-up. And in that stretch, he's led 170 laps. He's 10-1. That's a good number. Keselowski is 6-1. He's got 2 wins in 9 races there and has finished in the top 7 in his last 5 while leading a combined 187 laps. And Ryan Blaney is 16-1, and he's got a couple of top 10s there in 3 races, including 1 race at an Xfinity where he was a runner-up. So there's no reason to think that those 3 drivers are going to cool off this week.
No, I would say, and I wrote about that this week, that if I were to pick 3 early favorites or like a top 5 list, all 3 of them would be on it, just because how strong Penske has been at Vegas since they switched to Ford. Keselowski's the only one that made start there at Vegas when they were with Dodge, and he led 1 combined lap in 4 years and never finished better than 26. They moved to Ford, and he's got 2 wins, a 3rd, a 7th, and a 5th, and he's led laps the last 5 years. He started on the pole twice. He started 2nd another time, started 4th after that, and 11th. So they're qualifying up front. They're starting up front. If you go by trends, it looks like this is maybe Keselowski's year to win because he won in 14, he won in 16, and here we are in 18. So does he keep the even year trend going? Kind of how I believe the San Francisco Dodgers and San Francisco Giants in baseball kind of do that. Is Keselowski do that in Vegas? But Logano at 10-1 is kind of attractive sitting there with.
Yeah.
He's one of only 3 drivers to complete 100% of the laps this year. And he started off the season great. I know they were talking about how his car was a little tight last weekend, and this track is basically almost flat out. It's a repave a few years ago. So I think they can have that thing dialed in, start up front. He started on the front row 3 of the last 4 years there. He's led laps in 4 straight races. So I think 10-1, that may be your race winner right there and can win you a little bit of money there with Logano. But Blaney's sitting there 16-1. He finished 7th with the Wood brothers last year, started 3rd, finished 6th the year before that. He's also attractive sitting there at 16-1. He's one of the other drivers that's completed 100% of the laps this year. So really, I would say those 3, I don't see any reason why their luck would kind of run out this week. So I would say those 3 are going to be arguably could finish the top 5 on Sunday.
And, of course, we have to remember, too, what happened in the race last year, CJ, which was the Kyle Busch, Joey Logano situation. Because the race was pretty boring because Martin Truex dominated. Really wasn't very exciting. But Kyle Busch and Joey Logano, old friends, old buddies, wound up getting into it. And that was pretty cool. If you're a fan that likes to have fisticuffs after the race, Busch punching Logano, after they wrecked. And let's keep in mind that even though Martin Truex Jr. dominated the race, he did have to pass Brad Keselowski with a couple of laps to go to win the race, which, again, is what I said at the beginning of the show. Even when you dominate, you don't always win. So what do you think about what we saw last year from those drivers compared to what we might see on Sunday?
I don't know that you can hope for that much excitement 2 years running. I think it's a good track. I think the repave has helped it. They reprofiled the banking. It's a little bit steeper than it was when it first started out in the series, so it generally produces some good results and good racing. I think, Kyle Busch at that point in the season last year was really feeling the pressure. I mean, he had been so strong each of the prior weeks and just couldn't get the job done, and that continued throughout the rest of the beginning season or early parts of the season for him. At the same time that Logano and Keselowski were just having great success, and Keselowski went out there and led 89 laps. Martin Truex obviously was the dominator of the race, as you said. I think this year, with Ford being a little bit stronger, I would figure out a way to get, the Kevin Harvicks, the Brad Keselowski's, Joey Logano's, without a doubt this weekend into whatever lineup or whatever card you've got going on. I just think that this track plays so much to their advantages. They definitely have an advantage starting out here in 2018. The only ones that can really keep pace with them seem to be Truex, to be honest with you, Furniture Row Racing. So it's wide open for them to be able to sweep the top five, like Erik said.
What about Kyle Busch and Harvick this week, Erik? Harvick, by the way, is the favorite at 4-1. Truex and Kyle are next at 5-1. Of course, these are odds before practice and qualifying start tomorrow. Harvick has one win in 17 races. That was in 2015. Kyle's got one win in 13 races. That was in 2009. But Kyle had a pretty good car last year. He actually was caught for speeding in 5th place. And then, of course, had the altercation with Logano at the end, which is the reason he finished in 22nd. So it's one of those situations where you don't want to be misled by exactly where the driver finished, keeping in mind that Kyle Busch had a pretty strong car last year.
Yeah, Harvick scares me a little bit only because, I agree with CJ. I think the Fords are definitely improved this year. The only thing that scares me about him is he does have that win in 2015, but that's his only top 5 there since 2011. And also, he won last week. So,
yep.
Do they treat Vegas, since that's now a playoff race, do they, instead of going after results this week and like, hey, wait a minute, let's maybe treat this as a playoff race, because the temperatures I saw are supposed to be pretty cool out there. I saw in the 60s. So, and you're going to come back there in September, that it may be similar conditions. Do they kind of treat this as a little bit of a throwaway race and maybe prepare for a playoff bid, since they've never had that opportunity at Vegas before, since Vegas always used to be kind of a standalone 1 weekend a year race? Now they're coming back there. Do they experiment? That's the only thing that scares me about him. I think he'll be a contender if they don't. But if you guys see what he said this week about the 10 car, I think he said.
Oh, yeah, you mean Harvick?
Yeah.
You mean where it seemed like, what do you mean, that it might have been like a little dig at Danica Patrick, the old?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did, yeah.
So does that 10 car add an extra value now?
Sure.
Note that maybe that helps them this weekend. That they've, instead of kind of playing 3 on the rest of the field, they've got the 4th car that I think he'll be a factor. It just depends on how they treat this weekend. Kyle Busch, I think he'll be strong. It's like CJ said, he doesn't have that pressure on him this weekend compared to what he had last year. He's after Daytona. I think he just wants to position himself as far as points. I think you'll see him qualify up front. I think he'll run up front. The biggest question would be, does he have kind of what Truex had as far as the Toyota speed last year? If not, I would say this will be a Ford show, and maybe Truex the only other one that can really hold a candle to him, and Kyle Busch may be battling there for 5th or 10th. But other than that, if he can get maybe something from Truex, that he'd be the only other Toyota I could see kind of battling for the win.
What do you think about some other potential sleepers or long shots, CJ? And we'll throw in Almirola at 28-1 as a very interesting point from Erik, because this was one of those driver changes that kind of went under the radar, and nobody really, I don't think anybody thought much in Daytona. But fact is, Almirola has been, and before in his career, he has been a steady driver. But we're kind of seeing that again. I mean, nobody's going to say that he's all of a sudden going to be a steady top 10 driver, which he hasn't finished in the top 10 in either one of his first 2 races yet. But still, even if he hovers around the level where he is right now, that'd be a big boon for the team. But Almirola doesn't have any success previous year at this track. He's 28-1. But again, he's on a team, the best team he's ever been on, so that's going to help him out. So we're really going to see his talents, exactly how much talent he has come out, if they're going to come out. I guess you could take a look at, Erik Jones is 24-1. He was 15th here last year in his debut in the Cup Series. Suarez, I think, could be a good long shot at 50-1 because he raced really well here in the Xfinity Series. Debuted here last year with a 20th. And even Austin Dillon at 80-1. Where's the respect for Austin Dillon, who has 1 top 5 in 5 races here, which isn't great. But he's been a very good driver here in the Xfinity Series with 5 top 10s in 5 races, 3 top 5s, and a dominating win where he led 183 laps.
Yeah, I think that pricing is more from the fact that he's driving a Chevrolet more than anything else. He's a decent driver, but he's got the same problems that we talked about with Jimmy Johnson and the others. So that's why he's getting that pricing. As far as the group that you just went through, I think they're all, very good drivers and very good options. I think Almirola is definitely going to be the surprise. 9 races here. He hasn't even finished inside the top 10 yet. Remember last year and the years before, he'd be fighting for the odd top 15. Top 20 would be a pretty decent day, but pretty much average. And even the number 10 car, a top 20 would have been a pretty good day. Whereas now this year, what we've seen so far, what is he, 10th in points, 13th in Atlanta, 11th in Daytona. So regular top 15 finisher, he's going to be getting a top 10 very soon. And then as far as the other drivers, certainly, I think I completely agree with you on Daniel Suarez. That guy, just from every racetrack that he's been back to the second time in a Cup car, he's done significantly better, and he did really well even on this first time around. So don't take that finish, that 20th place finish last year with any kind of seriousness. I think he's in store for more this year. It may not be a win. I think it's going to probably come down to, the Kevin Harvicks, Joey Logano's, Brad Keselowski's, but certainly Suarez would be up there in the mix, likely also behind Truex, though, as well.
By the way, keep in mind, Kevin Harvick when you take a look at last year when he finished, when he had the wreck, that was due to the fact that he did have a tire go down. He was in 6th place, lap 68. So that is something to keep in mind there. What about sleepers for you early on here, Erik, for this race? Some of the drivers I mentioned, or how about another maybe driver that we were really not talking much about, even though we did talk a lot about him as a long shot in the Daytona 500. That's Paul Menard, and exactly whether or not this is going to be a much better situation for Paul Menard than he's had previously.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said as far as like Suarez. I think as far as those odds go, he would be a definite one to throw some money on. Menard, it's hard telling. Blaney got 2 top 10s in a row in that car last year. I thought he'd be a sleeper last weekend in Atlanta too. He was, I believe, 3rd in final practice, and on the long 10-lap average and further, even the 20-lap average chart, he was in the top 5 of those too. So I expected more out of him, but he just kind of stayed between 10th and 15th, which, as I think you'll kind of see out of him this weekend. Yes, he does have that quote-unquote 4th Penske car, but I just don't know if he'll be able to contend with those other 3. But one guy I kind of have my eye on are the 2 16-1 odds. You got Bowyer and Blaney. Obviously, we talked about Blaney, but Bowyer with a Stewart-Haas Ford, he's got plenty of notes to go off of. He was 3rd last week. He was 10th at Vegas last year. He was strong on the West Coast as a whole last year. Okay. He finished 3rd at Fontana. Ford has been improved. So I would say Bowyer at 16-1 would be one that I would really watch, because at Daytona, he was running really well, and then he dropped the cylinder, and he still finished in the top 15, running on 7 cylinders at Daytona. Yes, it was a restrictor plate track that he could kind of stay in the draft, but he's one I would watch at 16-1 only because of those stats and being a Ford. And like I said about Kevin Harvick, I don't know if he's experiment rolled this weekend, that maybe some of that equipment goes to Bowyer, because Kurt Busch at 20-1, I really wouldn't touch him this week.
No,
he has one top 5 finish at Vegas, and that was 2005.
Which is surprising because it's Vegas of all places.
Yeah, it's his home track, but his average finish is 21.75.
Yeah, so it's not working.
So the Stewart-Haas banner this weekend, I would take Bowyer, and with, like we talked about Ford and Penske, who's to say if, because I think this race you're going to see a lot of, kind of like last year, it's going to be cool, so the grip level is going to be high. It's already a repave, so it's going to be difficult to pass. So if Bowyer's already kind of hovering around the top 10, who's to say we won't get a late race yellow, and maybe they decide to take 2 tires instead of 4 or something and take the track position, and he's got the Ford power that maybe he can pull something off.
Yeah, that's always important when you go into some of these tracks. We'll try to throw that in there. I always think it's important when you do your race previews to kind of let the fans know which tracks you can take 2 tires and which you can't, because you always have a better shot for the long shots when you know you could take 2 tires on some of these tracks. So you're saying that this is a track, Erik, that you can take 2 tires and you might be able to be okay?
Yeah, this would definitely be one. It just depends on when the caution comes out there towards the end.
Okay.
But this would definitely be one. Atlanta's real abrasive, and there you couldn't go on a full fuel stint because your tires are going to stay under you. It definitely was. You had to pit really the drivers were calling for tires about 15 laps into a run. There was like a 13 to 14 mile an hour difference between new tires and old tires on just 10 laps.
Yeah.
Here, you're talking a repave. Like I said, the temperatures are going to be in the 60s. It's going to be kind of cloudy and cool. So the grip level is going to be high. So the tire wear will be low because of that. So
okay.
I think you can, I would definitely, especially if you know your pretty much 4 drivers you have to beat are going to be the 3 Penske's and Truex. It's kind of what Denny Hamlin and Logano did last week would be a good example. They knew that they probably weren't going to get higher than 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
They tried to go off strategy, and it almost helped them. So they both improved their finishes because of that. This week, I think it would help even more. So you look at a driver like Clint Bowyer, maybe an Almirola, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson. People like that might decide, hey, look, I don't want to finish 10th. I think I got a good enough car. I can make up for this later in the season. Let's try it. It's the 3rd race of the year.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and try to go off strategy.
3 more drivers I want to bring up here. CJ, a couple of them that Erik just mentioned. Kyle Larson, 6-1. He's got 2 top 10s in 4 races, including a runner-up last year. Now, he had a strong car last year, but he's never led a lap, though. Let's keep that in mind at this track. Denny Hamlin is 12-1, but this has not been a good track at all for Denny Hamlin. So kind of like Kurt Busch, you don't want to be taking Denny Hamlin in Las Vegas. 6th was a good finish for him last year, but he's led 14 laps in 12 races. And then you have Chase Elliott at 8-1, who was 3rd here last year. And even though he hasn't, he had the 38th and 16th the year before, so you wipe that out. Nobody cares about that. But he does have 3 top 5s in 3 Xfinity races as well at Las Vegas. And you would think that, okay, again, we understand what's going on with Chevy, but Elliott was better last week. And 8-1 is a nice number. So who do you like there between Larson and Elliott?
Wow. That's a tough call. Probably I would have to lean toward Kyle Larson at this point just because of his experience and being the new car, a little bit more experience in terms of years on the circuit, knowing how to race these Cup guys. I think he might be able to get a little bit more out of the new car faster than Chase, but Chase has got a really good record here in just 2 races. So, it's almost a coin flip, but, right now without looking at practice speeds or qualifying, I would probably lean more toward Larson. But I would also say I would not shy away from somebody like Kurt Busch here. I'll go contrary to what you guys both said. While he has been not great here, last week I felt like he was a little bit behind the ball, but the teams use strategy, and you'll see in my fantasy preview when it comes out that I also talked about the fact that 2-tire stops here in Las Vegas are going to be a bigger factor than we've seen so far this season, and I think that team learned a little bit of what they could do last week, and you might see them take that gamble again this week.
All right, and by the way, Jimmy Johnson, to show you how much he's struggling, he's clearly the dominant driver at this track career-wise, and yet he's 12-1. All right, so before I let you guys go, first of all, Erik, give me right now before qualifying and practice, give me your top driver that you're thinking about, and also maybe your top sleeper you're thinking about.
I'm going to go Logano this week just because of the start of the season and his odds 10-1 and how good he's been there. He's just missing that win, and I think he gets it. My sleeper, I'm going to go Bowyer. I'm just going to stick with him, just 16-1. Technically, I guess Blaney could be have the same odds, but
sure.
I think Blaney's kind of a no-brainer. You're going to see him up there. I don't think a lot of people will be talking about Bowyer, so I'll take Bowyer as my sleeper.
Yeah, I don't think, I doubt Ryan Blaney will be a 16-1 on Sunday.
No, that would have to probably rise.
That's why sometimes you take a chance, as we've talked many times about this before, CJ, when we've given our picks, because whether you want to take them before practice and qualifying, because it can go either way. You can end up and go, wow, I didn't expect him to be that bad, and I thought I was going to get a bargain here, and now all of a sudden I could have waited and got better odds and I might not even have taken the driver because he just didn't perform well in qualifying and practice. Or you gamble on the fact and you go, yeah, look, all Ryan Blaney's got to go out there and do is what we think he's going to do and qualify and practice steadily in the top 10, and I'll be taking the 16-1 number that I know will be sure to drop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been bitten a few times each by the fact that once you get on track for practice, odds don't typically match what you saw before things started. But I think Blaney's got a lot of potential. I think probably Kevin Harvick is still my pick for this weekend.
Really?
I don't know that. I don't know that they're necessarily going to take any excessive gambles. They were strong in Daytona. Things just didn't work out for them. Extremely strong in Atlanta. I see that continuing on this week. I think Keselowski would probably be my next choice after him. Pretty close. We'll see how it looks in practice and qualifying, but 100% agree on the sleeper. I would also go with Clinton Bowyer. I think he's somebody that impressed me last week at Atlanta, and I think he's got a lot of potential. He's got a lot of things going the right way finally at this point in his career and with this team, and I think this week we might see it come through.
All right, so both you guys at this point in time looking at Clint Bowyer as a sleeper play at 16-1, keeping in mind that Clint Bowyer, how many years has it been now? 4, 5 since his last win? Yeah, it has been a while, but hey, it's got to happen sometime. CJ, before I let you go, what are you working on as always for rotowire.com? Of course, we post a couple of your links to your reports. DraftKings, that comes out over the weekend after qualifying?
Yep.
Yep, right. And that's...
Qualifying's a little bit late this week because it's on the West Coast. It doesn't start till 7 Eastern, so it'll likely be out sometime Saturday morning. So fantasy preview there, especially for if you play the DraftKings game, and then within 24 hours after the finish of Sunday's race, you'll have my NASCAR barometer out to review or preview for the coming week as well.
All right, CJ, we'll get your picks on race day, and that's what we're going to do each week. We'll get the picks in the mornings. We'll post them up, tweet them out, let everybody know what official picks are here from our analysts, including Kenny Bruce, who will be on the show again real soon. He'll have his picks ready for us each week as well. CJ, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's CJ Radoon, and again, he'll be back with us all the way throughout the season. And before I let you go, Erik, what are you working on? I know you got so much stuff that you work on during the weeks. So what specifically are you going to work on now at this point between this show and race day on Sunday?
Yeah, now I'll just be focusing more on the practice and qualifying aspect. I got pretty much all the previews up and trying to weed in a 5-driver favorite. It's easy to go into the weekend and say these are the 5 to beat. but then you got to pay attention, not just practice on Friday, because that's more single lap speed or kind of on qualifying sims. Really try to figure it out by Saturday for final practice to look at, put in the qualifying single lap sims and your long range speed. So I'll be trying to weed all that through and get out some information as far as the top 5 drivers to watch. That should come out Saturday afternoon. Maybe some sleepers in there depending on if any.
Click on their Bruce. Twitter follows CJ Radoon, that's easy. Erik at Erit's easy. Erik at Erit's easy. Erik at Erit's easy. Erik at Erit's easy.